The Pittsburgh Steelers are still making moves in free agency. We'll talk about the new guard, Isaac Seumalo, what he does for the Steelers' offensive line projections, and what Omar continues to build and the message it sends for the direction of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm your host of the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app, but especially on YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of being an NFL GM and managing your own football franchise, this is the game that's definitely for you. Download the game by visiting ultimate-gm.com or look it up in your app stores on your mobile device. Listeners get up to a 100% free boost to their franchise when they use the promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, all one word, LOCKEDON, locked on in the game. Now, if you're a GM that you want to play that game in, you might be liking the move that Omar Khan's moving. Omar Khan, of course, in the Pittsburgh Steelers signed reportedly Isaac Seumalo, an offensive guard from the Philadelphia Eagles, who by some people had in the rankings, and PFF had it in their rankings as the best guard available in free agency, which is a very interesting move because the Steelers, we all talked about how the offensive line needed to get better this year. We talked about how they improved this year, but still the Steelers shouldn't settle for that, and they should still try to upgrade the offensive line. They already signed Nate Herbig last week. We talked about that and how, his power presence as a run blocker, that could be interesting, and how he fits in with the Steelers, but he needs to improve his pass blocking, and we're not sure if he would take the job from Kevin Dotson. Isaac Seumalo is pencil him in as the starter now at left guard. I fully believe right now as we sit here, it's going to be Seumalo at left guard, Mason Cole at center, and James Daniels at right guard, with Herbig and Dobson as your first subs in case anything goes wrong. I know some people are talking about Daniels moving to center. I don't think it's going to happen. I think they want him at right guard. I don't think anyone else is switching to center. I think this is a very solid group on the inside where you bring everyone to training camp. You have people battle it out. Like, don't just hand everybody jobs, but have people compete. But I think that it's pretty obvious that Seumalo, a guy that started for the Philadelphia Eagles, was a really good offensive lineman for them and was a big part of their run to get to the Super Bowl with the way that he was able to protect Jalen Hurts. I think I think he's the guy that he's more consistent than Kevin Dotson. I think Kevin Dotson has a high ceiling that he can play at a much better level than we've seen him. I've talked about that on this show a lot, that he has some great games, but some also ugly, terrible games, and that kind of balances out his resume. Seumalo, I'd say he's up in the level where he has some very good, he has a lot of very good to great games and very few games where you're like, man, did you cost us everything? And if you look at the charting that's given on Pro Football Focus with how they get, how many pressures he gives up, how many sacks he gives up a game in a season, he officially was tallied with 1 sack this season allowed. And that was with 714 snaps in pass protection. That's a pretty good rate. Now, he did give up 25 pressures and 21 hurries, but compare that to Kevin Dotson, who gave up 4 sacks. Granted, he also gave up 16 pressures, which is less, and less snaps at 639 passing snaps. And maybe some of that is due to, Jalen Hurts is a more mobile quarterback than Kenny Pickett, but still, you see the difference in sacks. Only 8 penalties on the year for Seumalo. There were 12 penalties for Kevin Dotson. I think what this is doing, and what Omar Khan continues to set up for the Steelers, as well as Andy Weidl, because let's make no mistake, this is Omar Khan's front office, but Andy Weidl is the guy who went out here, and Nate Herbig and Seumalo are both guys that either were with the Eagles or were just or were originally brought in by the Eagles, and those are definitely Andy Weidl type of guys, physical offensive linemen, big guys in the interior. And to me, this signifies the Steelers don't need to go after guard in this NFL draft class. Now they can still go after a center. There's guys out there. There's Schmitz from Minnesota. There's Weidl from Ohio State. All those guys could be on the mark, could be on the calendar. But you can now basically, like, I think if they're going offensive line, they could just really go tackle. And this makes sense for a few reasons. Offensive tackle, like Seumalo we know of Seumalo's contract, or at least I know. I've been out here in North Carolina covering March Madness. I'll be heading back to Pittsburgh by the time that you're probably listening to or watching this episode. And so we'll finally be back in my own house. But in all this time, the Steelers, they've been making moves to pay guards. And you look at Seumalo, we know it's a 3-year deal. It's not, but we don't know the money for it, but I don't expect it to be something outrageous. Like Orlando Brown, not that he doesn't deserve his money, but 4 years, $64 million from the Cincinnati Bengals. It's a lot of cash. And we talked about that last week and how if the Steelers were in on it, I don't think that they were offering anywhere near that kind of money for an Orlando Brown. And I think that the Steelers' philosophy right now might be, you know what? Sign the guards and the interior guys because you can pay them a lot cheaper if they're free agents. And maybe they just need to draft themselves an offensive tackle, which is what I think that this is setting this draft class up to be, is that, you know, we've talked about O-line, but some people feel like, you know what, maybe they need to go a lot more defense. Maybe they need to go get this position, that position. And I'm not saying offensive line is definitely the first round pick now, but man, I'm really feeling that it's a really good possibility that it could be, if not the first round pick, the 32nd pick or the 49th pick, one of those three. I think there's a lot of talented offensive tackles in this draft class. We've talked about them a lot this offseason. We'll continue to talk about it as we keep going through and start doing more mock drafts. Also, it is mock draft Monday. We will have a winner in the third segment. But I think there's a lot to go over there with that class. So I think the Steelers are preparing themselves to say, hey, we did it. We put a really good investment into this offensive line to protect Kenny Pickett and to open up holes for Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. As far as the interior guys, now you're going to be able to draft an offensive tackle. And then, you know, you have an offensive tackle that you added through the early parts of the draft. You have Dan Moore Jr. You have Chukwuma Okorafor. You'll have answers out there available for your offensive line. And as lucky again as the Steelers were to get through last season without any injuries to the starters that made them miss a start in the year, they'll be more prepared to be in that situation with the offensive line that they're building in the front office. So I like the Seumalo pick. I've only had about like a day to really look at some film. The guy seems to be really good in pass protection. I think he's a little better in run blocking than Kevin Dotson. I'd say considerably so. At least from what I've seen, but also I know it helps to be next to a center like Jason Kelce. So I think that there's whenever I'm looking at players, I'm also looking at how, you know, the reasons that they're finding success. And I think Seumalo deserves credit for the things he's done right, but it's always really good to have a superstar center next to you that helps set things up for you. It makes me wonder how will he do when he comes to the Steelers. And Mason Cole, a good center, a center that you can that I think is trustworthy and reliable, but not a guy like Jason Kelce, who, you know, is one of the best centers that we've seen in the past, I'd say 10 years. So all that to say, I think this is a really good signing. But I think this signing also points to more of a theme that myself, Alan Saunders, Josh Taylor, Wes Elo, a lot of the guests that you've heard on this show have been harping on all season and all off season, leading up to what the Steelers are going to try to do in the front office to address this roster. We'll talk more about that in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. So don't go anywhere. But first, before we do any of that, I want to talk to you guys about our great sponsors, the Ultimate Pro Football GM game, where right now, if you're trying to feel like a GM, you're seeing all these moves, these signings, the trades, the cuts, the deals. This is the game for you if you like this kind of stuff and you want to play the role of a GM in a game. And this game is very realistic in how it simulates an entire season. It goes through all the steps. It goes through the challenges of firing coaches, hiring coaches, dealing with egos, dealing with players, drafting, building scouting centers, you know, hiring other guys to help your organization, and then dealing with in week by week decisions, in season decisions where a player does something and you have to respond to it. It has so many things that fall in. It feels like you're actually controlling an NFL team and managing them through their seasons. And a season can go as fast as 5 minutes or as slow as a half hour if you wanted it to make it. But it's still a whole lot of fun. You just play 25 seasons as a team's GM that you build from the ground. And then at the end of that, they see how many titles you won, and you can see if you want to make another run. I did a run of 25 seasons, won 19 championships. Think you can do better? Prove us wrong at the Ultimate Pro Football GM game. And you can do that by downloading the game at ultimate-gm.com. That's ultimate-gm.com to download the game. And when you do download the game, which you can do so for free, you can go to the game store and get 100% boost on all the stats and resources in the game by using the promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On, all capital letters, all one word, in the game store for ultimategm.com. And again, to download the game for free, go to ultimate-gm.com, and you can also download it in your local app stores on your mobile device. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, where I'm your host, Chris Carter, getting you ready on a Monday here. Again, we have Mock Draft Monday coming up in the third segment. Let's take a step back from just the signing of Seumalo and what it does for the Steelers, but also what, again, we've been talking about, the direction I've been saying the Steelers are trying to go to, and that's becoming a team that plays really great defense and runs the ball efficiently, or controls the line at both sides of the line of scrimmage. We've seen teams like the Niners, teams like the Eagles, some of the successful teams out there using that kind of a model and becoming a winner, a team that's going to be, among the best in the NFL, And yes, having a superstar quarterback, very big part of that. The Patriots dealt with that with Tom Brady. The Chiefs had that with Patrick Mahomes. Joe Burrow and the Bengals, Josh Allen and the Bills, sure. But we've seen that other teams can counter if they're able to have a defense that A, stops the run, B, gets after the quarterback, C, has good coverage, and then has an offense that can run the ball effectively and have a balanced look and not put too much pressure on their young quarterback, who is right now for the Steelers, Kenny Pickett. And Kenny Pickett, I think he can grow into be a very good to great player for the Steelers over the years. And I think that he can be a great leader. I think that's his best quality that I covered him when he was at his time at Pitt. But I think that right now, as a young quarterback, easiest thing, like I've said all along, is get a run game that he can depend upon, that can get tough yards and tough moments, and can force defenses to go on a balancing act of saying, do we try to focus on stuffing the run, or do we try to focus on stuffing the pass? And that's when you start to put them in guessing games, and then it makes life easier for your young quarterback. And part of doing the running game is, one, making sure you have good backs, because it takes that. And I think that Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren are both good backs. But you also need an offensive line that kicks a whole lot of butt. And I think the Steelers got better at being butt kickers at the end of the season. We graded them as such. We talked about them as such all season long. But they need to be consistent butt kickers. They can't just occasionally be doing it. They need to win at the line of scrimmage most of the time and by a decent margin to make this work. And that's why you're seeing Omar going out. Last year, they signed 2 interior offensive linemen to free agency, Mason Cole, James Daniels. They're the starters. They helped stabilize the offensive line. Now they add Nate Herbig and Isaac Seumalo, 2 more big guys to the mix, and they already have Kevin Dotson. Kendrick Green, of course, is sitting back there, but who knows what's going to happen with that situation. But either way, you're coming into camp with a lot of big dudes on the interior that make a lot of sense. And I'm telling you, I really think this is lining them up to get an offensive tackle early on. They actually following through with that plan to add to the mix there, and that the Steelers would have a really good chance to build a strong line. And again, you're probably sitting there saying, okay, Chris, I get all that. But why? They're in a passing league. Doesn't it make sense to get better at passing and defending the pass? I hear you. But see, here's the thing, and we've talked about this a lot. The NFL operates like a pendulum. One time when one way of winning is earning wins, people flock to it, and then eventually that gets figured out, and the pendulum swings back to another direction, and that becomes the new way to win. And then everyone goes to there, and it goes back again. One way, a perfect example, is the 3-4. Back in like the early 2000s, the Steelers were one of the last teams to be using the 3-4. It was considered all but extinct. And then when Dick LeBeau's defense made them really relevant again, and they were causing problems for everyone, a lot more teams started to use the 3-4. And now today, a lot of teams are using the 4-3 again, because there's a lot of teams winning with four down linemen. It's just the way the world works. The NFL is a copycat league. But I think that what happens is when a lot of teams build their ways in the copycat way, build their teams in the copycat way, there's a lot of similar weaknesses. And that's what you're about to see happen in the NFL. I said this last year, as far as when the Steelers were starting to set themselves up, which is why I was thinking like last year they could have gone for an offensive lineman if they wanted to. But this year, I think they're making the concerted effort to make sure their offensive line is prepared to take advantage of this. Because while offenses are becoming more potent in throwing the ball, and they're gearing up to beat these defenses, and these defenses are countering their personnel development by getting smaller, quicker, faster guys who can cover, but might be more of a liability in run defense. But they're willing to sacrifice that because these other teams are really talented at throwing the ball. Guess what that means is that you might have a better matchup with a lot of these defenses with. It means that you could probably run the ball on a lot of them. And I think that's something that happened to the Steelers in 2021. Yes, sorry, years are adding up. But the 2021 season when they finished dead last in the NFL in run stuffing. Not that this was all of the problems, but the Steelers, they were trying to get guys like Devin Bush who were smaller, quicker, guys who projected to be people that could help more in coverage and be better against the teams that like to pass a lot. But you still need guys who can stuff the run, who can get after the quarterback, play to the line of scrimmage, be big, be physical, be mean, and set the tone. And I think that that's where a lot of teams haven't done enough of that. And I think that a lot of teams are opting for more of those coverage guys. And that's where, if you're on the offensive side of the ball, the easy way to take advantage of that is get big, mauling guys who love to eat up people and love to block and love to open up space and make that your strength. And if you make it your strength, you can make things a lot easier as your group collectively just bullies people at the line of scrimmage. And it's not going to always work. It didn't always work for the Eagles. They lost to the Chiefs. But the Chiefs also invested in guys in the trenches to help them. They had Chris Jones, who was going to disrupt things. Frank Clark, guys up front who could be problem creators on the defensive front. And the Steelers have those guys already on their roster with Cam Hayward. They've re-signed Larry Ogunjobi, TJ Watt, of course, Alex Highsmith, of course. And now they've added, 2 more downhill linebackers in Cole Holcomb and Elandon Roberts. I think that the Steelers are gearing up for this new era where they want to be bigger, stronger, tougher. They want to knock people around, and they want to play this physical type of ball. And again, Andy Weidl was part of the engineer to build that for the Philadelphia Eagles that got them the roster that got to this past Super Bowl. It just makes a lot of sense. They're just getting ahead of the game before all the other NFL teams do it. And some NFL teams already are. Like I said, the Niners, the Eagles, they're on that. But there's a lot of teams that are trying to emulate what these big passing teams are doing, what the Chiefs are doing, what the Bills are doing, what the Bengals are doing. There's a lot of teams trying to build up momentum that way. And if you don't have a superstar quarterback, and frankly, there's only so many of those out there, it's going to be very tough to run those types of teams and make them highly successful, which is why, again, I think the Steelers are making some smart moves here. Kenny Pickett may develop into that, but you need to be prepared for him for yourself to not force him to have to be that type of quarterback just yet. And I think that's what the Steelers are doing. They're saying, hey, he's young, second year of a 5-year rookie deal. You hope that he develops, but let's make things easier for him. And if these guys come in and they're protecting him a lot better, and they're also helping run the ball a lot better, it's going to help Kenny Pickett fight through those years where he's forming the way that he thinks in the NFL and get to a point where he can see more of the field. He can be an on-field commander, and he's not the young guy in the league trying to fit in. He's the quarterback who knows what he's doing in an offense that he knows how to run. I mean, again, I brought this up several times. Tom Brady wasn't Tom Brady when he first started. It took him years to develop the persona of being a guy that could be a field surgeon at any point in time on the field. That's where if you look back to their first 3 Super Bowls, he was clutch at times, but he wasn't nearly the passer or the seer of the field commander that he was for the Patriots in their later runs with him at the quarterback position. I'm not saying Kenny Pickett's going to be Tom Brady. I'm just saying it's a smart way to protect your young quarterback and help him develop into be the complete quarterback by winning the line of scrimmage, winning with the run game, playing good defense, and keeping the pressure off him to have to carry your team. And then who knows? Maybe in the last moment of the game, he gets to make the big drive that gets you the win. Look at the Raiders game that they won this past year. Look at the Ravens game they won this last year. And look at Super Bowl 43, because Ben wasn't as young as as Kenny Pickett was, but that was a game that was won because the defense and the offense did just enough to keep that game in range, so at the end of the game, just came down to one drive where the quarterback got to do his thing, but Ben didn't do a ton of heavy lifting in that game. It was really the end of the game where he came up big with that amazing throw at the end and the drive to get San Antonio Holmes down there, and then of course the toe tapping touchdown. It took time to get there though, and that's what I think the Steelers are setting up right now. They want to be a strong offensive line, which the Super Bowl 43 team didn't have, but they want to have a strong running game, a strong set of pass protection, and they're investing in the guys to do that, which is why I also think they need to invest in offensive tackle. And that's a hint to what's going to come next in our Mock Draft Monday segment, where you all have submitted hundreds of mock drafts on Facebook, on the Locked On Steelers Facebook group, or on my Twitter account at Carter Critiques, where I made my post. Look for that every weekend if you want to get your chance on the show. I'll reveal our Mock Draft Monday winner and go over all the picks right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast in just a minute, so don't go anywhere. But first, before we do any of that, would love to tell you guys about our great sponsors at FanDuel. And of course, FanDuel is the #1 sportsbook in America. It is Sweet 16 time here in March Madness. The second round is over, but that means the matchups are heating up. You also have the NBA, and there's no better place to bet on it than America's #1 sportsbook at FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, FanDuel, if you're a new customer to it, gives you the opportunity to have the no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. So download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use, and you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to threes drains. And FanDuel lets you make make player prop bets and gives you so many options. They also give you the chance to win it with a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss out on your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. As I said, it's Mock Draft Monday, so we'll be revealing our winner, where Steelers fans were submitting in their mock drafts for what they think the Steelers should do or they would do if they were the GMs. Also, go check out Ultimate Football GM if you want to have fun with that in that game. But I made a new rule this week. I said for this week, your first pick, wherever you did with it, you traded up, you traded down, you can stay where you at. It had to be an offensive player, because I wanted to get into who would you take on offense at that stage. There were some very interesting picks. There were some people going for Jordan Addison, some people going for Jackson Smith and Jigba. Some people were trading up and getting one of the top offensive tackles. This person, though, went a little different. They did go offensive tackle, but they traded down before they did so, and it added some interesting pizzazz to the pick that they got for it. So before we go into their picks, I want to give a congratulations to Kevin Penvose, who wins this week, because I think they did a really good job of addressing a lot of the Steelers' needs and getting good value for these picks. Now, if you're looking on screen, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see on screen, Kevin traded the 17th overall pick to the Chargers, getting the 21st overall pick and getting their third round pick at pick 85. Now, if you're sitting there wondering, Chris, is that possible? Would that be likely? I'll use the draft tech chart that we always talk about that puts point values onto picks to help you base what would be a fair trade, or what would NFL's team see as a fair trade. The Steelers pick at their first round pick at 17th overall would be 950 points. The Chargers pick at 21st overall would be 800 points. So that means the Steelers would have 150 points that the Chargers would have to make up in this trade. With the 85th overall pick, the chart has that valuing 165 points. So that would be very close, and I think that is an acceptable range. 15 points in this map of where we're looking here, where I do think that's a realistic, like, that could happen. Maybe they'd ask for a 4th next year or a 5th next year or something like that. I don't think they'd ask for the 7th round picks because those aren't worth that much. But all in all, that's a good premise, because now you have what's the answer? Another day 2 pick, which we've continued to harp on the show, is the sweet spot for this draft for a lot of key positions for the Steelers. But let's view again what Kevin did in this with his mock draft here by trading back. So he traded back, got 21st overall pick, got offensive tackle Anton Harrison out of Oklahoma. Anton Harrison, I think, is kind of the collective fourth or fifth offensive tackle in this draft class. A lot of people are starting to say Darnell Wright's in that class, but Anton Harrison, a guy I think a lot of people accept, like, hey, this guy could be very good if he develops in the right place. And Anton Harrison could be a reinforcement guy who comes in and says, hey, Dan Moore Jr., if you don't get it done here, it's my job to take off you. And then you're looking at a potential whole new left side of the offensive line with Seumalo at left guard, with Anton Harrison at left tackle, Mason Cole still at center, James Daniels still at right guard, and then maybe Chukwuma Okorafor presumably still at right tackle. All of those moves be on the table here. So then after that, Kevin, with the 32nd overall pick, got cornerback Emmanuel Forbes, smaller cornerback from Mississippi State, ball hawking guy. He has really good agility, but he's tiny, probably a slot guy. You could maybe live on the outside a little bit, but you'd want him using his quicks and covering and being able to flip his hips and get going at 100% of the speed. So I think that's an interesting pick there. It fits the turnover theme that the Steelers want, guys that have bigger ball skills and have that's what their emphasis is, less than being big physical tacklers and whatnot. So interesting pick at 32. But to me, this is where he really started to cook here. Kevin, you went in. I have to say, 49th overall, you get Georgia tight end Darnell Washington. Chef's kiss. Mwah. That was beautiful. I loved it because Darnell Washington, I'm not sure if he's going to be there at 49, man. That guy's built like a monster, and I think a lot of teams see that, and they're going to want it really bad. But I like the way that he plays. If you got him at 49, that would be phenomenal. I think that completes the Steelers' 12 personnel package. You have him and Pat Freiermuth. Darnell Washington could be the bigger blocker as well as a really good receiving tight end. Pat Freiermuth can kind of become your slot receiving tight end type of guy. You can line up, be bigger, run the ball, hit him with play action, and I think it would be a nightmare situation for opposing defenses, especially if the offensive line does continue to improve. So good picks there with Forbes and Washington in your second-round picks. Now, remember, you got 2 third-round picks because you traded back with the Chargers. With that first third-round pick, the Steelers' natural pick at 80, you got Gervon Dexter, defensive lineman out of Florida, a guy who has a great build to be a defensive lineman, and I think could be a really good pickup who maybe develops in about like first year he'll be decent, second year he'll be decent. But I think by third, fourth, fifth year, and then maybe the years to come, I think he has the potential to develop into a very good defensive lineman with the build that he has. And so I like some of his tape too, but he has to continue to get more consistent, keep building on his skills, all things he can do with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then at 85 overall, and I really, really like this one, Dion Henley out of Washington State. This guy went and got Dion Henley, who I have to admit, I keep saying there's 3 linebackers in this class that I really like, and Trenton Simpson and Jack Campbell and Drew Sanders, but Dion Henley's right there. And he had a really good Senior Bowl. I thought he really showed up there. I like his athleticism. I think he's a guy that you could put there, especially with that third-round pick slot. You could put him at linebacker, have him learn behind Holcomb and Roberts and see how quickly he develops into the game. And who knows, maybe he becomes your next linebacker that you want in the middle of the defense. But I think that's a very good pick with your second, third-round pick and your fourth day 2 pick there. Then go to day 3 picks. 4th-round pick, the Steelers only have really one there. Darius Rush, cornerback, South Carolina. You get another cornerback for the mix. This cornerback room right now for the Steelers is full of lots of older vets. We've talked about Patrick Peterson being added to the group, Ahkello Witherspoon, Levi Wallace, all those guys there. Now you have an outside guy and a slot guy, 2 guys that you can say, hey, learn with the older guys, get used to it. This is going to be your room someday where you're leading the charge. I think that's a very interesting approach. Then in the 7th round, you get Nick Hampton, edge rusher out of Appalachian State, and then safety out of Ohio State, Ronnie Hickman there with the other 7th round pick. Fine with either of those. But the bottom line here for Kevin and why I gave him is he followed the rules. A lot of y'all didn't follow the rules. Y'all picked defensive players when I said pick an offensive player. It was clear in letters on the rules of this contest. So if you picked a defensive player, that's why yours didn't win. If you picked an offensive player, I just liked this draft better for what we were talking about today. But Anton Harrison addressed the offensive tackle position as Omar Khan's addressing the guard position in free agency. Emmanuel Forbes and Darius Rush are corners that you could add to replenish a room that's going to need replenishing in some years. Darnell Washington gives you a really good tight end weapon. That's a weapon for Kenny Pickett as well as a blocker. So you get a double dose there. Gervon Dexter, Dion Henley, 2 defensive guys I think could really fit in what the Steelers are trying to build tradition-wise. I think all of this speaks very well. And congratulations, Kevin Penrose, again, for winning Mock Draft Monday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. And thanks for everyone for playing. We appreciate all of you for submitting yours. It's always fun. I just scroll through them and I'm looking through. I'm like, ooh, that one's interesting. That one's interesting. And then we try to match them up with what we're talking with on our Monday episode. So shout out to everyone who did that. We have a lot more coming this week. Who knows? Maybe the Steelers do too. I thought that they were done after Friday. They added another signing, and here we go again. And we're talking all things Steelers there. But we'll keep you up to date on all the moves, and we're going to get a lot of different perspectives coming in this week from people who cover the Steelers and talk about them a lot, because we want to keep the fresh thoughts coming here right on the Locked On Steelers podcast. So keep checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast on your favorite podcasting app, anywhere that you listen to and download podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. And thanks again for checking us out. Thanks again if you have followed my work with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette along with the Pitt Panthers basketball team. They just finished their run, losing in a tough game to Xavier, who's a very good team. I'm excited to see how they play in the Sweet 16, but it's a remarkable run for a Pitt team that played very well this year. We'll talk more about that with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette in the North Shore Drive podcast I do with them, so check that out if you want to hear my perspective on that team, because I think that they had a really special year with a bunch of really special people, and it's a remarkable group. If you're a Pitt basketball fan, you had a really good year. But back to the Steelers. We'll have more tomorrow talking on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. I'll be back on your screens and in your ears very soon.